A very warm welcome to the Narrows here in Portaferry. I hope you enjoyed the shanties performed by the Sea Selkies this morning as you entered in to get your coffee. My name is Heidi. I'm one of the directors of the Irish Ocean Literacy Network, the IOLN, and in partnership with Queen's University Belfast, we're hosting today's event. So Strangford Lough has shaped the lives and the livelihoods on these shores for thousands of years. There's maritime tradition in its place names, its working knowledge, its living memory of generations who have fished, sailed, farmed, and protected it. And it continues to shape the science, the stewardship, and the storytelling that bring us all together this morning. So the question that we're all exploring today is, how does knowing where we come from shape where we go next? So I'd like you to turn that over in your mind as we participate in the conversations today. Before we get into it, I want to tell you a little bit about the IOLN. So we are a network of practitioners, people across the island of Ireland who care about the ocean and want to help others connect with it too. Ocean literacy used to mean something quite narrow. It was about facts about the sea. But the concept has really evolved, and we now recognise that ocean literacy encompasses the various ways that people relate to the sea. So knowledge is definitely important, but so are emotions, how people feel about the sea, communication, how we talk about the sea or don't talk about it, who has access to it and who doesn't, and who takes action and what type of actions people take for the ocean. So that breadth of ocean literacy is why on our panels we have sailors, we have storytellers, we have scientists, we have educators. They can sit together and have a conversation because everybody's doing ocean literacy just in slightly different ways. So the names and logos that you can see here are the IOLN's members. We have over 50 organisations and individuals across the island, from Donegal to Cork to right here in County Down. We are made up of researchers, artists, educators, fisherfolk, communicators, conservationists. It's a real range of people who participate. So when we talk about ocean literacy, it's not about one community talking at another. It's about bringing all of these voices into the room together to listen to each other and learn from each other. We've three main ways that we work with our members. First being our working groups, which have 4 themes: understanding local activism, training and capacity building, education and campaigns. So members of the IOLN can join any of these working groups and influence what they're working on and prioritise what they're doing. Communications and resources, so we have a website, a newsletter and a social media. Those are the main ways we keep in contact with our members. And our main goal is information sharing. So for example, if you have an event, we can promote it to the network. Or on our website, for example, we have a directory of marine education programs. So if you have resources that other organisations can use, we can host them online for you so that resources aren't being made from scratch over and over again. We're also involved in projects. For example here, the Guardias project, which I'll tell you more about in a few slides' time. So understanding local activism, our first working group, is what drives these regional meetings. Just like this one, it's the heart of how the IOLN listens. We come to coastal communities, always in partnership with a council, a university, or a project. We host events in English and in Irish, and then we focus on issues that matter where we are. So last week we were in Annagry, Donegal. Today we're in Portaferry, and coming up next we'll be in Tramore, Waterford. And this is our 13th meeting to date, so they're not all represented yet on the map. But at every regional meeting we learn something new, and I'm sure today will be no different. Second working group focuses on training and capacity building. So we ran a survey and asked our members what they felt their training needs were, what were the skills gaps, the knowledge gaps, where did they need more capacity, and these were the 4 main priorities that came out of that. So we received funding from The Wheel to organise and deliver this training for free to our members that focused around practical skills, financing ocean literacy activities, how to run a campaign, and coming up next is around how to actually evaluate the impact of your activities. So the training is free, but we also recorded those sessions and have the resources on our website, so anyone who couldn't make it on the day can still access that training. We're currently running a campaign, What the Sea Means to Me. So in many ways, that is today's theme made tangible. We are inviting anyone and everyone to share what their connection to the ocean means or looks like in whatever form fits them best. So perhaps that's an essay or a poem, piece of visual art, an audio or video piece. It can even be scribbled down on a bit of paper. But the goal is to bring all of that together and weave it into some sort of tapestry that tells all the various ways that we connect to the ocean. So if something said today moves you, it sparks a memory, ignites an idea, we'd love you to share that with us. Downstairs, we have a table, for you to be able to contribute your story. We also have recording equipment if you're interested in recording it that way, or you can share stuff with us at a later date. To help support this campaign, we are recruiting a part-time campaigns officer, supported by a grant from the Heritage Council. So if you or you know someone who is interested in storytelling, ocean literacy, and has experience in digital campaigns, please do share this with them. So a lot of our working groups is really focused on how we work at a grassroots level with local communities. But we do work internationally as well. For example, we're a partner in the consortium of the Guardias project, which is a Horizon Europe funded project. So over 20 partners in this across Europe and Australia. The goal of the project is to improve the detection and prevent the spread of aquatic invasive alien species. Our role in this project is around supporting communication and dissemination of the project outputs and insights. This project started last January, and I think it's a good reminder of how, in this case, biodiversity work, conservation work, isn't only done in the lab or in the field. A big part of this project is around public reporting and changing behaviours related to biosecurity measures, and that's ocean literacy. It's central to achieving that project goal. So the IOLN is the oldest ocean literacy network in Europe, and it's recognised internationally as a leading practitioner network. We have documented our journey from volunteer group to formalised network with members in an upcoming publication. This is part of a series of books being published under the Ocean Decade. So we contributed our chapter, which talks about the challenges that we overcame to become this formalised network, as well as celebrate what we've achieved so far. It's going to be launched in the summer, and we're celebrating that at the ICASE World Conference on Science and Technology Education. So in that conference, one of the themes is marine science education, and we've been supporting the organisation of that. So we'd love to see any of you there if you can make it down to University College Cork in June. So I always have 3 wishes at these events. First, that everyone in this room leaves either having learnt something new about the loch or the people who care about it. Maybe you'll meet someone new over tea downstairs, over lunch, or maybe you'll be inspired to do something new with your connection to the sea. So how does knowing where we come from shape where we go next? I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Bob Brown to open this conversation. Bob grew up on the Sussex coast, came to Belfast for university, took his research to Sweden and the Arctic, obviously thought that was far too cold, so went to Jamaica to do some oyster farming, and then finally came back to Northern Ireland, where he spent a decade as the National Trust's warden right here in Strangford. He's led RSPB in Northern Ireland, chaired the Biodiversity Group for Northern Ireland, the Marine Protected Areas Group for JNCC. He has generously offered his expertise and guidance to the IOLN over the last couple of years. And in 2004, he was awarded an OBE for his services to nature conservation. So thank you, Bob.
Morning, everyone, and thank you, Heidi. I feel quite embarrassed by all that, to be honest with you, especially as I find the idea of being keynote speaker quite scary. If you'd said, Bob, would you just rabbit on a bit, that would have suited me fine. But nonetheless, that gives you some idea, Heidi's giving you some idea of where my background is, and I suppose I've been involved with marine life ever since I was a child, down on the Sussex coast in southern England, going out onto the shore there with my wee brother, and we would go collecting animals. We knew how to read the tide tables to get the spring tides, get the best creepy crawlies to bring back home to my long-suffering mother, who then had to deal with a load of creatures that were seriously pissed off. And then through all those things that Heidi said, one of the things that's given me one of the strongest feelings about oceans is that I've been lucky enough to give lectures on expedition ships down in the South Atlantic, and the Central Atlantic and in Antarctica as well, which has given me, well, quite, even though I was involved with the marine life before, it's quite an insight into the oceanic aspects of things. And that's really the theme that I want to deliver today, and that is, we're going to talk about our local heritage here, but as Heidi has said, we want to see where we go from here. How are we going to spread this? And for that reason, I wanted to put our work here into the wider context of the oceans as well. And previously, what has always happened was the oceans were treated partly as a transport mechanism. It was partly to do with military and sea battles and things like that, and also a source of food as well. And that was about all the vision was for the last thousands of years in many respects, although you could argue that there was fascination with things like dolphins and that sort of thing. But particularly in Victorian times, there was increasing awareness of the wealth of the seashore. People were going out there onto the sea, onto the beaches. Victorians had a fascination with seaweeds and that sort of thing, and with other animals as well. And so they would go down there, especially after the invention of the railway. They could get down from places like London out to the coast. And so also at the same time came along the awareness of the wealth of life on the seabed, as well early dredging situations like this, which looks to me to be distinctly hairy, and I certainly wouldn't want to have been the oarsman in that boat, dragging that dredge, but there you are. And so this was beginning to develop as an awareness of the value of the marine life of our oceans and many other aspects as well. But I think the big game changer was the Challenger expedition, which was from 1872 to 1876. And this ship, commissioned by the British government at the time, travelled the world's oceans, stopping here, picking up new scientists, leaving others off and so on, and collecting and dredging right from the very depths into, as well as the shallows and the coral reefs around the world. And those of you who've worked at the marine station at Portaferry will recognise the sort of general ambience of the laboratory aboard HMS Challenger, although I suspect the kit has changed somewhat since those days. So there was a new concept being developed about the wealth there. And as you can see, 4,700 new species, an immense audit of the wildlife of our oceans. It was a complete game changer. But another aspect also fits into this as well that came along much later. And this was the whole concept of oceanic currents. That actually the oceans swirl around. It takes maybe, well, you can read any number of websites about what length of time it takes for this circulation to take place, but often 1,000 years is quoted, as the water circulates around the entire planet from both the Arctic and the Antarctic regions through the tropics and through the major oceans there. And I think this is the key point that I know that IOLN particularly have emphasized in some of their work, and that is there is actually only one ocean. And if we go away with that message, then I think we will have done something. And that's the message we need to convey to all our audiences out there, so that the water flowing past us here has been in the tropics, has been in Antarctica, and will be there again. That is the ocean flowing out there. It's not just Strangford Lough, it is the ocean. But what we've got here in Strangford Lough and in Ireland as a whole is a very small portion of it. We think of Ireland as our substantial home, which it is, of course, but actually it's a really tiny place when you think about it in the context of the world's oceans. And it's also a very tiny place if you think about it in terms of other big continental land masses. For example, I'm going to do a bit of an experiment here. This may not work, but see the big blobby thing in the middle there? That is just a symbol that I picked for Ireland. It's green and it's a bit rainy, although today clearly not. But what I've done then is change that symbol into little symbols about the size of the island of Ireland, very roughly. And I've put those little symbols all around the coasts of South America, North America, Africa, Europe, and so on. And it gives you the impression, and this is what I want us to convey to many, many other audiences, how much we are a coastal place. If we look at the size of Ireland on the continent of Africa, for example, we're just a little blip on the size of Africa's coast. And it just gives you an idea of the scale there. I hope you folks at the back can see that as well as at the front. But if you can't, it kind of makes my point, doesn't it? That we are actually a very, very tiny place. And just one example of that, many years ago I had the opportunity of traveling down the length of the Amazon. And in the Amazon estuary, there's a cluster of islands there. And there's an island called Marajó, and it is in the estuary, small island in Amazonian context, but that Marajó Island is the size of Ireland. And that puts us into that context as well, I think. So against this vast global scale, even our beloved Strangford Lough out here is a tiny little puddle, really. And it comes and goes with glacial shifting sea levels. About 9,000 years ago, Strangford Lough didn't exist here. It was a shallow depression with some watery ponds and some post-glacial forests and woodland, I expect. So as a European islanders on the island of Ireland, we're on the fringe of Europe. We're on very much a fringe place. And compared with, for example, Britain, our terrestrial biodiversity is relatively impoverished, and Britain's biodiversity on the land is relatively impoverished compared with that of Europe. We really are on the fringe, if you like. We're on a limb. But the moment you step down, down to the, getting too excited about this, down below the high water mark, it's a very different situation. Our marine life is some of the richest. Ever since the 1850s, we've known that the British Isles, and Ireland especially, is at an interface between northern-oriented species of cooler, relatively cooler waters and southern ones as well. And even from the, as I say, from the 1850s, that was known. And the other thing there, which is illustration, is the sea temperatures, which were recorded and mapped in September, I think it was 2018. So, which is you can see a remarkable correlation between them both. So we're here, our marine life is at an intersection, a crossroads, and it's far, far greater in wealth than our terrestrial wildlife. In fact, it's our marine life around the Irish waters, with our wealth of geology, for example, creating the different type of habitats, particularly in Northern Ireland, which has an outstandingly diverse geology, means that it's really far more important, I think, than our terrestrial wildlife. And Strangford Lough here is, marine-wise, is as special as it comes as well, despite the devastation that has taken place with some very destructive fisheries. And so then after that, in terms of that marine life context, we haven't even started on the human heritage for the place as well. So let's start thinking about that. About 35% of Ireland's population live within about 5 kilometres of the coast, according to the Marine Institute. And in Northern Ireland, it's about 44%. And this doesn't take into account the little tiny communities. They're mostly looking at the big cities and towns and that sort of thing. When you think about the tiny communities, then it's probably much more. And this is the same thing with people all the way around the world. Most of the big cities in the world are actually on the coast. Think London, New York, Buenos Aires, Mumbai, Sydney. You know, the list is absolutely excellent, unlimited almost. So what is the coastal zone where all these cities and these folk live? It is more than just a shoreline or a zone experiencing wave action and that sort of thing. There is, in a sense, no seaward limit to our coastal zone. You might say that actually continental shelves probably help a bit for practical reasons, but this is, our coastal zone, seaward-wise, is absolutely part of the ocean. However, when it comes to the landward side of it, we've got to be a little bit more careful about how we define that. And my view has always been that the landward element of a coastal zone does not relate to lines on maps. That's not practical. It relates according to function and the influences that take place. And we need to define what we mean by that. In a sense, you could argue that the whole of land on the planet, in the continents and so on, is actually part of the coastal zone because of the human impact upon climate change and that type of thing on the oceans. But let's not go too far that way, or we'll be here for weeks. So a couple of examples about what I mean about that in terms of the coastal zone. I sailed with the late Brian Black, environment correspondent for Ulster Television, sailed with him up to Bear Island in the Spitsbergen Islands, far north of Norway. And we there encountered on this, hang on, I should be pressing buttons here. Here we are. Yes. And there we encountered on this island, Bear Island, incidentally, Hvalrosbukta means Walrus Bay. There are no walruses there. They were all exterminated by fisheries and fur hunters and blubber hunters back in the 19th century. Anyway, I was traveling up there with Brian back in the 1990s, and when we went onto the island there, we encountered researchers who were looking at the concentration of PCBs, industrial chemicals, I think they're associated with battery production, PCBs in glaucous skulls and fulmars there in the birds' bodies, but also in their eggs as well. Now, these industrial chemicals hadn't come from Bear Island. Bear Island, the only thing that's on it human-wise is a small weather station run by the Norwegian government. These were industrial chemicals up to one of the most remote parts of our oceans, and yet these birds were being heavily impacted by that. That's an example of how the coastal zone extends way from the industrial centres as it's impacting upon seabirds right out in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. So there's one example. Another one, do you take that famously landlocked country, Switzerland, and you think, well, that's not got much to do with the coastal zone. But actually the northern parts of Switzerland, Zurich and Bern and places like that, their industries, their sewage works and all of the rest of that actually end up in the Rhine. And where does the Rhine end up in? It ends up in the North Sea. So that for good or ill, decisions made about industry and population in landlocked Switzerland impact upon the North Sea. And when it isn't understood, things can go badly wrong. There was a famous quote which I came across on one website. I hope I've got it right, and I'm not doing him an injustice, but an Australian minister had relation to their highly polluting coal industry that they have there, came up with the quote in a TV interview that no way is the coal industry polluting the environment. You don't have to worry, it's only going into the sea. So decisions, for good or ill, can make a vast impact, and that's what I believe the coastal zone to be. So what about the cultural awareness of our coastal issues? Well, in 22 and 23, 2 online surveys took place in Republic of Ireland. I think it was called the Fair Seas one, and Deira in Northern Ireland, explored how much people were aware of ocean-related topics. And the overall conclusion was there was affinity with the oceans, but understanding the detail of different aspects was very varied. And in Northern Ireland, 41% considered their own awareness to be very poor, although interestingly they said that it was important that the right decisions were made about our oceans. And there's more project work that's being thought through at present, exploring connectedness with our oceans. In this room, well, we're kind of self-selecting, I think. And I like to think all of you here have got the salt of the ocean running through your veins as much as it is running through the channel, the narrows here. So in a sense, I feel I'm probably preaching in some respects to the converted, because you have this little bit of ocean here in your hearts and your minds. But outside, in other places, it's very different. I gave data about the size of our communities, and maybe 40% overall of Ireland's population, north and south, live within 5 kilometres of the shore. And yet through the streets of Dublin, Belfast, Sligo, and many other places, I see very little real awareness of how oceanic we actually are here. Even when it comes down, I've talked about the gulls who are experiencing the pollutants up in remote Bear Island. But if that's the only impression our people get about the value of our seabirds here and the nuisance value of when you're having a picnic on the beach, then I think we're missing the point. We've got to get these messages across and the wider context of that. And even when we think about seafood and fish and shellfish, that is forming, apart from fancy restaurants, that's forming very much smaller component of our diet these days. You look at any supermarket and you will see that the fish counter is minuscule compared with the animal meat counter, you know, of pork and beef and stuff. So Heidi's given you a wonderful summary of IOLN and its aims, trying to bring people together, relevant institutes and agencies, all working towards a vision of achieving an ocean literate society. Now, when we say ocean literate, we don't necessarily, in fact, we don't at all mean being well read about this. That's not the point. It's awareness and connectivity, connectedness with our oceans. And the network celebrates the inextricable cultural ties, but also needs to build up the awareness of this. And I'm going to give you a quote that David Attenborough came with, and he said, "The future of life on Earth depends on our ability to take action. Many individuals are doing what they can in managing the oceans and making awareness, that's all of you, of course, but real success can only come if there is a change in our societies, our economics, and in our politics as well." And that's everyone else out there. So here we are, we've got this conference here. We've got the echoes and heritage of memory, who we are, where we came from, and so on. And then in the afternoon, we've got Voices for the Future. Where do we go from here? Well, dealing with the first part of this, let's first of all, should work. Yeah, there we are. Should work. The first thing to remember is that our communities are full of people today who are descendants of those who featured in the old stories. And I'll bet a pound to a penny that those folk walking along the seawall here in Portaferry, they probably have descendants who are still walking up and down here to this day, and whose children are going to school and so on. So there is a direct linkage across that way. And we're blessed with a vibrant local maritime culture, helped by being in a beautiful place. And boy, I don't know how we arranged this. It must have been Kat who probably organised this weather. But it's absolutely beautiful. And the Narrows here, the Ards Peninsula, Lough, and the wider Strangford Lough, with its waters and its islands and its glistening mud flats. Now, I don't want to tread on other people's talks, but we do have here a vast resource of heritage, if you like. We have history, fishing, smuggling, wrecks, the former current turbine, recreational boating, and lots of people who come from elsewhere, who love to take day trips. And they go down one side of the loch, enjoy the ferry, take a couple of pints of Guinness, and then maybe wobble their way back up to the other side there. And on the way, apart from the Guinness, I hope that they are absorbing something of our own local heritage here. And we've got the marine life and the birds. The Lough plays, and apart from the fact that they're very beautiful, the birds, and exciting spectacles, the Lough plays a global role in sustaining species from the Arctic to the Antarctic. The terns that migrate between here to Africa and indeed to South Africa and South America. The Brent geese that go up to Arctic Canada. We share seals with the many other areas in the Irish Sea. A seal from round the rocks here could be up in the Clyde before you know it. And then elsewhere, the puffins on Rathlin, in the wintertime, they overwinter in the wide Atlantic. And Manx shearwaters off the coast here will nip down to the Bay of Biscay for a spot of fishing to bring back for their young there. And we have the Queen's University Marine Lab and the wealth of the marine life here, and documenting that, and its publications are now seen on a global scale. And I suspect that Christine's going to talk to us about the Marine Biodiversity Data Portal later on, which is, again, documenting the wealth of our marine life. And all the way around, also other parts too. The Causeway Coast is a whole area, Rathlin, Glens of Antrim, and further afield, the Wild Atlantic Way, Titanic Centre, the maritime heritage of Cork, and all those poignant tales of small islands off the west coast of Ireland, and desertion over the last century or so. And we know that roughly 94% of people in Ireland visit the coast at some stage or other in the year. And this heritage isn't fossilised. This heritage is growing all the time. The coastal rowing associations, and I know that Isabel might be mentioning those, that were set up with the help of the Police Service of Northern Ireland by Caroline Nolan, who worked here formerly, and bringing very different elements of our communities together. The youth sections of sailing clubs are burgeoning as well, and growing memberships of environmental organisations. So there's a lot to build on here, and we're going to hear lots about that, I think, in the first part of the conference. But for daily folk, in their daily lives in other parts of Northern Ireland, well, what are they actually feeling? Despite the fact that our weather and lives are dominated by the Atlantic, I think that for them, this valuable heritage is a lovely, engaging and enjoyable, but optional extra. It's not really deep inside. And in case we all think that here in this room, us salty dogs here, think that we're God's gift to maritime wisdom, apart from being steeped in our own local heritage and our local biodiversity and stewardship and so on, do we salty folk rarely look up to the horizon and see the vast oceanic picture? Are we too local? I think maybe we might be. But do we, through events like this, care enough to develop this understanding, make a bridge from our own local heritage into the wider picture? And that's where the afternoon session comes in. We've got to identify and explain, and if you share with people what the sea does for us, why is it important, why bother with it at all? Well, you know many of the things that I don't really need to go through them. It's climate regulator, it makes our planet habitable, the ocean sustains more habitats and species than on land, food source, medicines and so on, and stories and culture as well. You know all of that. And then you also know what we've done to the sea, bad and good examples. I hope many of you, if not all, have seen David Attenborough's film about the fishing and the damage to the oceans and fish stocks and the seabed habitats that he produced. It's absolutely heartbreaking. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure it's online somewhere. It is absolutely heartbreaking. But we've also, all of us, responsible for ocean warming, acidification, threats to plankton, sea level rise. And no ocean is, or no bit of our ocean is free from this. Even the deep Mariana Trench in the Pacific is actually littered now with plastic particles. And back home here, we had the debacle of the fisheries wrecking the horse mussel beds, one of the richest habitats in northwest Europe in the seas. We have runoff from fertilizers here down the River Bann into the sea. But we're not the only ones, so let's not completely beat ourselves around the head. In southern England, the intensive farming there, during winter rains a couple of winters ago, vast quantities of degraded soil washed out into the Atlantic and was spotted as a plume coming out from southwest England. And even on a more local basis, Consider, for example, the dual carriageway built between Belfast and Newton Ards through Dundonald. Well, smart move, link the towns together. But the moment that had happened and the country lane was converted into dual carriageway without any consideration of the impacts on marine life, then the pressure was for commuting down the beautiful Ards Peninsula, the pressure on housing there, the pressure on the sewerage system and infrastructure then impacts upon the Lough's marine life. And planners always seem to look at the impacts of coastal developments from the land. They never seem to look at it from the sea's point of view. And you see along the channel here, I'll not name any sites in particular, but some really grotesque pieces of architecture completely out of keeping with our valuable scenery here. So we've got all of these, and just one tiddly little example, but if we take ocean warming, for example, plankton shifts in response to changing sea temperatures, and small fish populations, fry and so on, sand eels, feed upon that plankton. Seabirds, which are still currently declining in some respects, but they feed on those little tiny fish. Well, Rathlin feeds upon the spectacle of seabirds nesting on its cliffs there. And the economy of Rathlin is very strongly dependent on the fantastic spectacle of breeding seabirds at the cliffs at the West Light. So, if climate change shifts the distribution of seabirds and their food and the food chain, Rathlin's bank balance is going to go down the pan. That's just one example of a global impact on just one tiny local community. But this is to look at things on a purely transactional basis. There is also something spiritual and wild about the oceans that we need to keep in our hearts and minds as well. We should be humble because of this, the impacts we are having. And we can't really call it a true wilderness any longer. As I say, the Mariana Trench has now got plastic particles in it. But it does have wildness, and that wildness is deeply inspiring. So how are we going to fix things? Well, we can't do it by talking at people all the time. We need to have a two-way dialogue, and we need to do as much listening as talking, or perhaps even more listening, and sharing, and setting out our wares for folks to react to. We need partnerships. We've got to bring in and talk with education organisations, commerce, developments, the arts, sports, and of course, decision makers as well. Because without this, we're not going to make a difference. And this gets quite political in many respects, because democracy, I think was it Churchill who said democracy was a rotten system, but it was just that all the others were even worse. I think it was Churchill. He was always saying something about something or other. What happened? It is cumbersome, and politics is partly leading the way, and partly it's looking over the shoulder to see what public opinion is. So there are U-turns, and we do find that progress in the environment is very restricted. The impact through local constituencies, through local economies, even if they are relatively small in the grand picture, is far stronger than the pressure of the vast greater number of people who care for the environment because of the system, the sort of old jobs versus birds myth. And yet, in the Fair Seas survey, 76% of respondents identified lack of will as being a big obstacle for progress in the environment. But it's not all doom and gloom, because when things happen and governments perceive opportunities, good things happen. For example, there's a whale sanctuary all the way around the Irish coast. It was declared in 1991, and I'm sure there are issues about its management and how it's working, but I'm quite sure that the government was able to get this through because whales are seen as a generally speaking good thing, and there was a lot of public support for this. But it also, despite the ambitions of Norway and Japan and Iceland to start whaling again, it does send out a very clear signal. And again, another one here, down in South Georgia, in the Antarctic waters, there, an enormous marine protected area. It's a sort of a diagonal sort of a shape in two bulbs there. And the long axis of that is something in the region of 1,000 miles long. It's an enormous marine protected area. Of course, apart from some very damaging fisheries and illegal fisheries, which are now being managed in the area, there wasn't anyone else to complain. The government had an open door, and it was able to react responsibly. On the island of Arran, Western Scotland, a pressure from the local community there set up voluntary marine nature reserve. And now, after lots of battles and arguments, that is making progress and habitats are recovering. And when independent agencies can operate without those political constituency pressures, like the European Union, we were able to set up the whole ring of Natura 2000 sites, special protected areas and SACs and so on. On a wider scale, here there is, this is as it says there in the quote, most important talks that nobody ever heard of. That is the UN High Seas Treaty about looking after our seas wisely in vis-a-vis pollution, fisheries, and that type of thing. The Antarctic Treaty, again, deals not only with the continent of Antarctica, it protects all the sea areas north of Antarctica to 60 degrees south. And then you think about the membership of our environmental organizations, thousands of people supporting National Trust, RSPB, a host of other organisations in the Republic of Ireland, and of course Ulster Wildlife here as well. And if you add all the memberships together, it's more than all the political parties put together. I must stress that the IOLN is not political itself. It is a platform where people can discuss their views and share their opinions. That's what it's about. We're providing a platform and an opportunity, and I must make that very clear. But it's only if we actually make a change in society that we are going to shift the winds of change in favour of much wider use of our seas and overcome some of the, if you like, political Achilles heels that stop us. So we've got a great start here. We have a wonderful heritage, and we need to develop those stories, and we need partners to offer these stories, offer them to communities who don't see this as part of their scene. We've got to have good news stories as well. We mustn't be preachy or glum. We've got to have joy and pride in this fantastic heritage, and we're going to have to remember that people in Belfast, Armagh, or in the centre of Ireland are as much part of the oceanic scene as any old salty old sea dog sitting on the harbour wall here shooting the breeze will do. So here in this room, we can be catalysts. We can link with other people, and if other people come up with ideas that we haven't conceived, so much the better. So we need to get above, we need to look at the horizon, we need to take the heritage we've got here, lift it up, bring it out to a wider context. So my last slide here is a bit weird. It's out in the ocean, it's about halfway between South America and Africa, and it's a football. I made it look round there with the aid of PowerPoint, but actually it was rather lumpy because probably something like a shark had taken a bite out of it. But it's a kid's plastic football. It's in the ocean, and it's about 1,000 miles from the, about 1,000 miles from the nearest piece of land. What had happened was that we were travelling northwards, we stopped the ship because the weather was so nice, got the inflatables out, and we all went for a dip in the sea. And it's rather weird swimming around, splashing away and everything when you know that the bottom of the sea is 6 miles below you. But there was this football, and it's got its growth of hydroids, it's got goose barnacles and so on. Where did that ball come from? Had it been swept up by the Benguela current, coming up from Namibia, South Africa? Had it been swept out from the Brazilian, Brazilian football-mad communities on the Amazon? Had it been carried down from the Caribbean? It's been there for some time because it's got quite a growth on it. It just illustrates the connectedness. And now where is that ball? We left it there. Where is it now? It could be out off the west coast of Ireland coming in on the Gulf Stream. Maybe one or two of you will recognise it later on if you go for a walk in Galway or somewhere. And it just illustrates how connected our ocean is. That's why I put that up. And I'll just end with a quote by David Attenborough. No one will protect what they don't care about, and nobody will care about what they have never experienced or understood. So our responsibility is to develop that experience and understanding. So let's live up to the challenge. Thank you.